Hey, it's Rishi Patel, founder of Selling in Alignment, where I work with coaches and consultants to reprice and package their services so they can discover and live their purpose. Today is Intention Monday, and we're talking about harnessing the power of water, fluidity, and adaptability in business. Water is such a powerful element because it is capable of so much. And inside of being capable of so much, there are so many lessons that we can learn from water in order to be able to harness and really understand what it's all about. So water really is known for its adaptability, flowing smoothly around objects. And doesn't that teach us a lot about embracing change? There's so much there around really taking on change and looking at how we can be adaptable in a business setting. And that doesn't mean being weak. It's more about adapting for strategic navigation through potential obstacles. So let's take an example. When we look at water in nature, we may see that it's forged a route through a potential path in which there may have been boulders and rocks and things like that. And over time, sometimes hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, it's forged this path through these rocks in order to start from where it is and to get to where it needs to be, maybe out into the big ocean. And isn't that incredible? That teaches us so much about persistence. Imagine when we're taking on a potential challenge or a task that's a little overwhelming, and it's very easy in that space to get overwhelmed and just to take us out of a presence of who we really are for the world, to disconnect us maybe from our mission and our vision and what we stand for. And water teaches us so much about the power of just keeping going, because it needs to get somewhere. It's not going to be blocked by anything. Isn't that incredibly powerful? And the only way to really block water off is to create a dam. And look at some famous dams inside of history and how massive and strong they have to be in order to hold water back. That's something else about water that we can learn as well. Isn't that really incredibly powerful? The fact that water, it's so gentle. If you want to hold a little bit of it in your hand, it's such a gentle thing. And yet to hold it back, to create a dam, you need so much force. And why? Why is that? It's because it carries so much innate power in itself. And let's have a look here. So Lydia says, yeah, this is really powerful. In the midst of not wanting to change, being fluid, it's really painful and unhelpful process, but this is the hardest part, the willingness and change to be fluid. Absolutely, there has to be a willingness there to be fluid. And that in itself is incredibly powerful, because when we have that willingness, when we have that desire to serve, to do something for a greater good, the forces of nature come into existence to align and help us to get to that objective. Sometimes it may not necessarily feel like that, but that willingness to change, as Lydia just said, is absolutely essential. It's absolutely vital. And I love that idea because it tells us about the power of persistence. When we have that willingness to change that Lydia just mentioned, it ties in beautifully with the power of persistence, because then we have that willingness to be persistent. Because the willingness to change will naturally infuse that willingness to be persistent. And water just keeps going. It tears away its stone over time. It persists to get to its potential route. And now imagine one of the all-time greats that talked a lot about water and has a famous quote around water is Bruce Lee, one of my personal heroes, and of course a very well-known martial artist. And he talked about the idea of be like water, right? When water goes into a cup, it becomes the cup. And so imagine that's an adaptability, that's a power, that's a flexibility that we have. How can we apply that in business? Well, imagine whichever scenario in, whichever setting we're in, regardless of if we're networking, we're talking to people one-to-one, regardless of if we're going onto a stage and talking to people live, real time, it's in our best interests to really be able to adapt to the scenario in which we're in and thrive in that space. And water does exactly that. It's incredibly, incredibly powerful. And let's just think a little bit outside of the box here, because The fact that water can fit into any form that it goes into, and Bruce Lee talks about this, is when water becomes the cup, it becomes the cup. If you put it into a teapot, it becomes the teapot. It's true because it takes the shape of whatever container it gets put into. And how powerful is that for looking at something like creative problem solving in business? Now imagine we're given a task where we're creating a campaign, we want to build out a campaign for 5 or 6 new clients. And that's a creative problem that we've now come across in business. Like, how are we going to create this campaign to generate these 5 or 6 new clients at this particular price point? We package up a really high value, high end offer. That we can really look at as an opportunity, as a challenge, as a blessing. Why? Because just like water becomes any formation that you put it into, we can then be really creative around how we solve problems. And it reminds me of this idea that actually all of the things that we class as problems already have a solution out there in the ether. It's just that we haven't tapped into it and we haven't accessed it. And what water does so beautifully is it adapts and is flexible to anything that it gets, any situation that it gets put into. Isn't that so powerful from this element of water, which formulates in nature? It's all around us. It's even in our bodies. It's a massive part of the earth. 60% of the whole globe, more than that, is water. Now this element, imagine the power of it. It has the power to give life. It has the power to adapt. It has the power to be just so soft if you just have a tiny bit of it in your hand. It's just a really incredible thing when you really think about it. And it just keeps overcoming obstacles. It just keeps persisting. And so we really get to find then with that a balance and a harmony. And balance is absolutely key in nature. Now, how can we strive for balance inside of our company, inside of the way we show up for work, inside of the way that we show up in our organizations? So as a coach, one of the ways in which we can find balance is really having people stand in their greatness, having people become the very best that they can be. And at the same time, there is this serious power around being able to show them that, you know, this may be a limiting belief that they're looking at, and having them transcend beyond that, having them access their innate power, just the way that water crashes through things as and when it needs to. There's so much to unwrap inside of this idea for water, and really, if we were to summarize what we've spoken about, we're really talking about embracing change. So change is the only constant. That's a very famous saying. The very famous saying is that change is the only constant. Why is that? It's because everything around us in nature and in our lives is continuously changing. Nothing stays still. Nothing stays the same. And if it does stay the same in nature, if it stands still for too long in one particular place and there's no change, it dies off. And nature will eliminate things that are standing still for too long. Look at any aspect of nature, it's constantly moving. And like that, why don't we bring an element of that into our week, this week? And this is the whole idea of Intention Monday, is to really bring a principle into our week where we can really look at things deeply and completely take it to town and crush it. And one of the things that we can look at is just that. How willing are we to be able to adapt to the constant change that is happening? How focused can we stay in the moment where things around us are consistently changing? Reminds me of that quote, inaction in action. So we may be constant, we may be still, we may take time out to observe all of the action around us while being in action. It's actually quite incredible, and again, it's something that water demonstrates to us throughout. Well, we combine this with what Bruce Lee says about how water is able to take a formation and take a shape and sit inside of this vessel, or sit inside of be anything. Water can either flow or it can crash. That's another part of that saying from Bruce Lee. So water can flow beautifully, or it can crash against something. Where it crashes against something, eventually it will erode through it. It will find a way. Let's take an aspect of what we discussed here in Intention Monday, apply it to our week, and completely crush what we're doing. Until the next time, keep selling in alignment.